Chapter 20. An Offer of Work. Andrew woke up in the middle of that night, calling out, "Am I a fool, Chris?" She comforted him in the darkness. "No, we don't want to stay in Wales for the rest of our lives, dear. We've been happy here, but it's time for us to move on." "But, Chris, we can't afford to buy a practice yet. We ought to save some more money before we leave here." "What does money matter?" she answered in a sleepy voice. Her confidence gave him courage. Next morning, the world seemed a cheerful place. He had no need to worry about the risk that he was taking. He now had a degree, and over £300 in the bank. They would never be hungry. Now that he was to leave, everybody wanted him to stay. A week after the inquiry, Owen and 2 or 3 members of the committee called at his house and asked Andrew to change his mind. But he refused. Reports of his coal dust discoveries had recently been printed in a number of medical papers in England and America. A few days later, as a result of these reports, Andrew received several letters. One letter was from Chalice, who asked Andrew to visit him that week. Andrew lost the letter and forgot to answer it. Another letter interested him more. "This pleases me, Chris. It's from an American named Stillman," he told her. "Yes? Is he a doctor?" she asked. "No, not really. He runs a small hospital in America where he treats people for diseases of the lung. The medical profession refuses to recognize him. But Stillman is a good man, very clever at his work. I'll tell you about him sometime." He sat down and replied to Stillman immediately. As he still neglected to answer Chalice, Andrew soon received a second letter from him. This stated that the Coal and Mines Board, having read about his coal dust experiments, wished Andrew to be their medical officer. When Christine read the letter, she said happily, "Didn't I tell you that something like this would happen? Isn't it good?" "Yes, lovely." Andrew went straight to the post office and sent a message to Chalice accepting the offer. Chapter 21. The Coal and Mines Board. The offices of the Coal and Mines Board were in a large stone building in the centre of London. On a bright morning in August, Andrew ran up the steps of this building in high spirits. "I'm the new medical officer," he told the man at the door. "Yes, sir," said the man. "Mr. Gill is expecting you. Jones, take our new doctor to Mr. Gill's room." Andrew was led into a large, sunny room, where Mr. Gill, a cheerful little man, shook hands with him and said, "Please sit down. Would you like a cup of tea?" While they drank their tea, Gill made some remarks about the weather. Then he led Andrew to his room, which was also sunny, with a view of the river. I hope you will like this room," Gill said, with a smile. "Oh, yes, it's a beautiful room." "Now I'll introduce you to your secretary, Miss Mason." Gill took him into the next room, where Miss Mason, a friendly young woman, sat at a small desk. "Miss Mason, this is Dr. Manson." "Good morning, Dr. Manson." They had a short conversation, and then Andrew returned to his own room, where Gill remarked, "I'll send you some reports to read." A pile of reports arrived. Andrew read these dull accounts of meetings of the board as quickly as he could, and then went to Gill and asked, "When can I start work?" Gill was surprised at his question. "Heavens, Have you read those reports already? I thought that I had given you enough to keep you busy for a month. He looked at his watch. Let's go out. It's time for lunch. At lunch, Gill explained that the board would not meet again till the middle of September, and that there would be no other work for Andrew until after that meeting. Andrew went back to Christine that evening with a feeling of disappointment. "Would you believe it, Chris?" he said. "They're not ready for me. For a whole month I shall have nothing to do except to read reports and drink tea." "Never mind," said Christine, her thoughts on other things. "It's lovely here, much nicer than Aberalour. I went for a walk this afternoon. Oh, I planned such lovely things for us to do." He had rarely seen her so excited. "My love, let's go out to dinner. Then, if you're not too tired, we might go to the theatre." As she led him to the door, he laughed. "I need some entertainment after my first day's hard work." Next morning, he read every report again. Then he began to explore the building. Suddenly, he found himself in a long room, where a young man in a dirty white coat was sitting on a box, smoking a pipe and doing nothing. "Hello," Andrew said. The other answered tiredly, "Lost your way." Andrew introduced himself. "My name's Manson." "I thought so. So you've come to join the Forgotten Men." He paused. "I'm Dr. Hope." "What are you doing here?" "Heaven knows. Some of the time I sit here and think, but most of the time I just sit. Occasionally, when there has been an explosion, they send me bits of a dead miner to examine and tell me to find out the cause of the accident." They went out to lunch together. Hope then told Andrew more about his duties, and about the members of the board, 3 of whom were Challis, Abbey, and Gadsby. "Do you know Gadsby?" Hope asked. "I've met the gentleman." Andrew told Hope about his examination. "Gadsby is a clever man, but he's only interested in himself." Hope, who had a great sense of fun, laughed suddenly, and then told Andrew a joke that Abbey had once made about Gadsby. He gave another loud laugh, and then became serious. "Abbey is the best man on the board. The others spend so much time quarrelling that they never make any decisions." Andrew and Hope had lunch together nearly every day. Although Hope was always joking, he was a clever young man. Andrew believed that one day he might do something important. While Andrew waited for the next meeting of the board, he and Christine explored London. They began to feel that they belonged there. Chapter 22. Measuring Bandages. At last, on the afternoon of September the 18th, the board met. Sitting beside Gill and Hope, Andrew watched the members enter the long room. "Gentlemen," the President addressed the meeting, "we are pleased to welcome our new medical officer. Dr. Manson has made some important discoveries, and we must give him every opportunity to develop his research. We wish him, gentlemen, to visit the mines and examine the miners in many parts of the country. We will give him all the help that we can, including the skilled services of our young friend, Dr. Hope." Andrew drew one quick breath. This was better than he had expected. "But, gentlemen," the President continued, "before Dr. Manson starts this work, I think that he should attend to another and more urgent matter. I think that first he should make a study of the medical materials used for accidents in mines. For example, there is no fixed standard for the width of bandages. I feel that Dr. Manson should inquire into this matter and make a report suggesting the best width and length of bandage for each of the most common forms of accident. Silence. Andrew looked desperately round the table. Surely, sir, this bandage question is of little importance, Abbey argued. Dr. Manson, it is certainly not of little importance. The government has asked for this report. Excuse me, sir, Andrew interrupted. I understood that I was to do medical work here. For a month I have been wasting my time doing nothing. Now, if you expect me to— He stopped and looked at them. It was Abbey who helped him. Dr. Manson's argument is very reasonable. For 4 years he has worked patiently at his research, and now, after offering him the opportunity to work on this further, you want to send him out to measure bandages. If Dr. Manson has been patient for 4 years, he can be patient for a little longer. The President laughed. After the meeting, Andrew discussed the matter with Gill and Hope. It won't take you long. Only about 6 months, Gill comforted him. Then you can begin your work on the coal dust. He won't get the chance, Hope laughed. He'll be measuring bandages for the rest of his life. Oh, very funny. Andrew picked up his hat and went home to Christine. He bought an old car, and on the following Monday he and Christine began their tour of the coal mines. Anyway, at least we are together, Chris, Andrew remarked. The work was very simple. Andrew examined the medical supplies at several hundred mines and then returned to London and wrote his report. The Coal and Mines Board sent this report to an important member of the government, who at once asked Andrew to call at his office. "Your report is excellent, Manson," he told him. "The government intends to introduce a new law controlling the use of medical supplies in mines and factories. We shall base this law on your report. But there is one suggestion that I would like you to change. I think that a narrower bandage would be better than the size you suggest. Don't you agree?" Andrew was angry. "Personally, I prefer the bigger bandage, but I really don't think that it makes much difference." "What? No difference?" "No, no difference at all." "You treat this matter very lightly. Don't you realise how important this is?" Andrew lost his temper. "Have you ever been down a mine?" "I have. I've done a bloody operation, lying in a pool of water with only one small lamp and no room to move. And I tell you this, the size of the bandage is of no importance." Andrew left the building more quickly than he had entered. When he returned to his office at the Coal and Mines Board, he stood for some time, looking out of the window. "I don't belong here," he thought. "I'm a doctor, not a clerk." Towards the end of May, he informed the board that he was leaving. Gill tried to persuade him to stay, but Hope said, "Don't listen to him. You're lucky. I shall leave as soon as I can find another post, if I don't go mad first." Several months later, the government, acting on information supplied by Dr. Gadsby, publicly declared that coal dust was the cause of a dangerous disease. Next day, the newspapers praised Gadsby for his useful work and described him as a great doctor. Chapter 23. Andrew's First Practice. Andrew and Christine began to search for a practice. They sold their car to add to their savings. They now had £600, but it appeared that this was not enough money with which to buy a practice in London. Then, when they had almost lost hope, Andrew heard that a doctor in the Paddington area of London had died, and that his practice was for sale at a price which they could just afford. When they went to see the large, cold house that would be their home, they were disappointed. "It's in a miserable area," said Andrew. Then, suddenly becoming more cheerful, he added, "But there are nice houses in the neighbourhood. What do you think, Chris? Shall we take a chance and buy it?" Christine was doubtful. She was tired of London now. She hated this cold house and the dirty streets. She wanted to go back to the country. But Andrew seemed so anxious to buy a practice in London that she let him have his wish. "All right," she said. "Buy the practice if you would like to." He bought the practice, and in October he and Christine moved into their new home. "We've spent everything, Chris. You must be very careful with the money," Andrew warned her. To his surprise, she burst into tears. "Careful? Aren't I always careful?" "Chris, what's the matter with you?" "Oh, I hate this house. It's so dark and dirty. But, Chris, it's the practice that's important, not the house." He held her in his arms and tried to comfort her. Next morning, at 9 o'clock, he opened his surgery. His heart was beating fast with excitement. 9:30 came. He waited anxiously. It was nearly 11 o'clock now, and still no patient had arrived. Suddenly, the surgery bell rang, and an old woman walked in. She had a bad cough. Andrew examined her and then gave her a bottle of medicine, for which she paid him a small amount. Andrew felt as excited as if this was the first money that he had ever earned. He ran to Christine and showed her the coins. "First patient, Chris. This money will buy our lunch." That evening, 3 patients came to his surgery. But on the following day, he received no patients, and on the next day he earned less than £1. Andrew began to ask himself if he had made a bad mistake in buying this practice. He and Christine were so poor that sometimes they did not have enough to eat. They went to a cheap food shop owned by a fat little German woman who called herself Mrs. Smith for their meals. Mrs. Smith liked them and was kind to them. She became very fond of Christine, and one day she said to Andrew, "You will be all right. You will succeed. You have a good wife. Don't worry, I will send you patients." They tried to pretend that their struggles were amusing, but never had they known such hard times. Chapter 24. Andrew decides to succeed. Andrew felt a great desire for the friendship of another doctor. Denny was abroad, having taken a post with an oil company, and Hope was now working in the north of England. So Andrew decided to telephone Freddie Hampson. "This is Manson, Andrew Manson. I've bought a practice in London," he told him. "Manson? In London? Good heavens, man! Why didn't you telephone me before?" "Oh, I've been too busy," Andrew smiled to himself. "I'm married now, Freddie." "So am I. We must meet at once. Can you come to dinner on Thursday? Good." Christine expressed no pleasure when Andrew told her of the invitation. "You go alone, Andrew," she suggested. "Oh, nonsense. I know that you don't like Freddie very much, but there'll be other people there as well. Probably other doctors." When they arrived at Hampson's grand house on Thursday night, Freddie greeted them most warmly. "It's lovely to see you people again. How do you like my house, old man? Didn't I tell you that I would succeed?" It looked a most expensive house. Andrew was about to express his admiration when Mrs. Hampson entered. Almost at once the other guests arrived. Introductions followed, with much talk and laughter. Then they went into dinner, a good meal with expensive food and drink. After 2 glasses of wine, Andrew felt very happy. He listened with interest when Ivory and Deedman, 2 well-known and successful doctors, talked loudly about their medical experiences. He said to himself, "I must get to know these men better. They're so rich and successful." "I played a clever trick the other day," said Ivory. "I persuaded a patient to have a course of 12 treatments. I told him that the usual charge for this was £50, but that I would be willing to reduce the price to £45 if he paid me immediately. He gave me a cheque at once." "That's the way to make money," Freddie laughed. "And a bottle of medicine would have done him just as much good." Ivory smiled. "Yes, and the price of the medicine is under £1."
"Most people," remarked Deedman, "do not realise how little these treatments really cost. The important thing is to make them think that they are expensive."
Ivory and Hampson agreed. "Exactly. The more you charge a patient, the more confidence he has in you." They continued to talk in this manner after dinner. Andrew listened, smoked, and drank. They all drank. They brought Andrew into their conversation, and when Christine said that it was time to go home, Ivory remarked warmly, "If at any time you would like my advice about a case, Manson, let me know. I shall always be pleased to help you." Andrew thanked him and walked with an unsteady step to the door. On their way home, he said happily, "Chris, we've had a lovely time, haven't we?" She answered coldly, "We've had a terrible time. I like Denny and Hope, but not those people." "Why? What do you mean? What's wrong with—" "Everything. The food, the furniture, the way they talked. Money is all that they think about." Mistaking her remark for jealousy, Andrew cried out, "I'll make money for you, Chris." "I don't want money," she said. "But, my dear—" He tried to put his arm round her. "Don't. I love you, Andrew, but not when you've drunk too much." Andrew said no more, but when he went to bed that night, he promised himself, "I will make money. I'm going to succeed too." Next morning, Andrew looked up the qualifications of Ivory, Deedman and Hampson in a medical book. To his surprise, he discovered that these rich doctors did not have the qualifications he did. "I can do better than they are doing," he said to himself. Andrew made a sudden decision to find himself a part-time post at a London hospital. As such appointments were not easy to find, he went to see Sir Robert Abbey. "I will do my best to help you," Abbey promised him. The Victoria Chest Hospital would be the best for you. I will make some inquiries." Andrew went home, feeling very pleased. "I've just seen Abbey," he told Christine. "He's going to try to get me a post at the Victoria Hospital. A hospital appointment would improve my position greatly." The pleasure in her eyes made him feel sorry. "I've been very bad-tempered recently, Chris. Will you forgive me?" he asked. She ran to him, saying that it had been her fault. Andrew now worked with increased determination, feeling sure that he would soon have some good luck. Slowly, his practice improved, but he still had many disappointments. Some of his cases were serious, needing admission to hospital at once. Yet Andrew could rarely persuade any hospital to admit even the most dangerous case. "Doctor who?" they would ask when he telephoned. "Who? No, sorry, we have no empty beds." One day Andrew went to Christine, complaining, "They've plenty of beds for their own doctors. If they don't know a doctor, they refuse to admit his patients. This is London. This is our hospital system. It's terrible." He was still waiting to hear from Abbey about the hospital appointment. He was also disappointed that he had not heard from Hampson or his friends since their dinner. Feeling rather miserable, he sat in his surgery one evening towards the end of April, thinking about his future. It was nearly 9 o'clock, and he was about to lock the door for the night when a young woman entered. "What is your trouble?" he asked her. She smiled and sat down. "Mrs. Smith in the little food shop advised me to come to you, Doctor," she said. "I work at a large dress shop. My name is Miss Cram. I'm having trouble with my hands. I've been to several doctors in this area, but they have not been able to cure me." He looked at her hands, which were very red and sore. With sudden interest, he examined them more closely. "They make it difficult for me to work," she said. "I've tried various medicines, but they have done no good." "No, they wouldn't," he said. "You are suffering from a rather rare skin disease. Medicines are useless for this disease. It is caused by the food you eat." "Well, no doctor has told me that before." He laughed and wrote out a list of the foods that she must avoid. She took the list, saying, "I'll take your advice, Doctor. I'll try anything." She paid Andrew for his services and left. 10 days later, she returned. "Look at my hands now, Doctor. Cured. I am so grateful to you." "That's all right," Andrew answered awkwardly. She rose. "Perhaps one day I shall be able to prove to you that I am grateful," she said. He smiled and showed her to the door. Chapter 25. New Patients. Miss Cram's cure caused surprise and excitement at her dress shop. She advised the other girls working there to go to Andrew, and they all took her advice. Anxious to see what this great doctor was like, at least 6 or 7 girls who had nothing really the matter with them attended his surgery every evening. Their visits greatly increased Andrew's profits. But Miss Cram was only beginning to express her thanks. In the first week of June, Andrew received a letter asking him to call at the home of a Miss Everett, a rich woman who lived in a very expensive part of London. "This is my chance, at last," he told himself, when, closing his surgery early, he left home to visit Miss Everett. The servant who opened the door led him into a large, beautifully decorated room where Miss Everett, a woman of about 50, was waiting for him. She gave him one look and then came straight to the point. My doctor has died. It's a pity, because I trusted him completely. Miss Cram suggested you to me. I looked up your qualifications. You're well qualified." She paused and took another look at him. "I think that perhaps you might be the doctor for me. I always have treatment for hay fever at this time of year. You understand hay fever, I suppose?" "Yes," he answered. "Which treatment do you have?" She mentioned the name of a well-known cure. "My last doctor advised it. It has been very helpful." Andrew wanted to tell her that this treatment was useless, but decided that this would be foolish. He could not risk losing this chance to make money. He said, "Then I will give you the same treatment, Miss Everett." "Good. I suggest that I pay you £1 for each visit. Do you agree to this arrangement?" £1 a visit. He had never been paid so much before. The idea of giving a treatment in which he did not believe no longer worried him. What did it matter if it was useless? He was tired of failure. He wanted to succeed, and he would succeed. He visited Miss Everett again the following day at 11 o'clock. He then called twice a week. After each treatment, they would talk together for perhaps half an hour. Andrew told Miss Everett of his desire for success, and she encouraged him. On his last visit, she gave him a glass of wine and paid him a cheque for £12 for his services. She then led him to the front door and stood for a moment, looking at him. "Will you take the advice of a woman who is old enough to be your mother?" she said. "Get yourself a good suit. You say that you wish to succeed. You will never be successful in those clothes." He walked down the road, feeling hurt and angry. But his annoyance soon passed. "She's quite right," he thought. "How can I attract high-class patients if I wear clothes like these?" When he reached home, he excitedly showed Christine his cheque. "Look at that woman! This is real money. What a well-qualified doctor ought to earn. £12 just for talking nicely to Miss Everett and giving her the E-treatment." "What's that?" she asked, smiling. Then suddenly she was doubtful. "Haven't I heard you say that that treatment is useless?" His expression changed. She had made the one remark that he did not wish to hear. "You're never satisfied," he shouted, and went out of the room. The next day he went to a good shop and bought himself 2 new suits of clothes. He felt a little awkward when, for the first time, he came down to breakfast wearing one of these suits. Christine was pouring out his coffee when he appeared. For a moment she was too surprised to speak. "Andrew," she cried, "you look lovely. Are you going somewhere?" "Going somewhere? I'm going to visit my patients, of course." "Well, do you like it?" "Yes, it's very nice, but—" She smiled. "But it makes you look so strange." "You prefer me to dress badly, do you?" He finished in silence, and then left the room to start his work. 3 weeks later, he had reason to be glad that he had bought these suits, because Miss Everett then sent for him to attend a relative and a friend, both of whom wanted the same hay fever treatment. Andrew gave them the treatment without feeling at all guilty. Actually, he felt very pleased with himself. He was winning. His desire for success made him forget the bitter things that he used to say about other doctors who behaved in this way. He forgot, too, that this improvement in his affairs had been started by a fat little German woman in a cheap food shop. Soon, another exciting opportunity was offered to him. One afternoon, when he was counting the money that he had earned during the last month, the telephone rang. "Oh, Dr. Manson," said a voice. "This is Mr. Winch, the manager of the dress shop in which your patient, Miss Cram, works. A lady has been taken ill in the shop. Will you come at once, please?" "I'll be there in 4 minutes," Andrew promised him. He was met at the shop by Miss Cram, who explained, "It's Mr. Roy. I advised Mr. Winch to send for you." At that moment, Mr. Winch himself appeared. "Oh, Doctor, I'm so pleased to see you. Come this way, Doctor." He led Andrew into a small room where Miss Leroy was lying on the floor, shouting and crying. She was about 24, with blue eyes and fair hair. Andrew knelt down beside her. On the other side of her knelt another woman. "Oh, Toppy, Toppy," the woman kept saying. "This is a serious case," Andrew said. "Can you get me a chair, please?" Slowly and very gently, Andrew lifted Miss Leroy, who was still shouting, onto the chair. He held her head and said a few words quietly to her. Then suddenly he hit her on the face. Immediately, Toppy stopped shouting. Andrew hit her a second time. Then he turned to her friend and explained, "Sorry, it was the only thing to do. She might have done herself harm if she had continued like that for any longer. She'll be all right in a few minutes." "I must take her home," said her friend. "Will you come with us?" "Very well," Andrew agreed. They took Miss Leroy home by car. Her house surprised Andrew. He had never entered such a grand building before. Toppy threw herself down onto a comfortable chair and said to her friend, "Ring the bell, dear. I want a drink. Thank heavens father isn't at home." A servant brought in some drinks. When he had gone, Toppy's friend smiled at Andrew and said, "I'm Mrs. Lawrence. I think that I had better explain what happened, Doctor. Toppy had an argument about a dress that she had ordered. She's been feeling very tired of late, and is rather quick to quarrel." She paused. "We are very grateful to you, Doctor." Toppy looked at Andrew. "I went mad, Doctor, didn't I? Go on, Doctor. Say that I went mad. Laugh! It was very funny." "I didn't think it funny." Andrew spoke quickly, feeling that he too should explain himself. "You had a bad attack. I am sorry that I had to hit you." There was a pause. Andrew had finished his drink. "Well," he said awkwardly, "I must get back to my work. Send for your own doctor tomorrow. Goodbye." Mrs. Lawrence led him into the hall. She was tall, dark, and quite young. She gave him her hand and said with a smile, "I admired your form of treatment. I can see that one day you will be a great success." Walking down the street, Andrew noticed to his surprise that it was nearly 5 o'clock. He had spent 3 hours in the company of these two women. He would be able to charge a high price for his services. A very high price. Chapter 26. The Nursing Home. On the following morning, when Andrew was about to visit some of his poor patients, Mrs. Lawrence telephoned and asked him, in a most friendly manner, to call on Toppy again. Andrew went straight to the house. Here he met Mr. Leroy, who looked at him quickly and said, "Listen, Doctor, I'm in a hurry. You're a clever young man. Well then, cure my girl. Stop all her stupid nonsense, her crying and shouting about nothing. Give her the best treatment. I can afford it. Goodbye." When Andrew went upstairs, he found Mrs. Lawrence waiting for him outside Toppy's room. Every day Frances Lawrence was present at the time of his visit. Her quiet, gentle manner attracted Andrew. Although he did not realize it, she soon began to influence some of his actions. She suggested that he should buy a car for his work. Andrew made no mention of this to Christine, but he began to ask himself how any doctor could develop a high-class practice without a car. A man in his position must not be seen walking down the street, carrying his own bag. He could not afford to buy a car in one payment, but he could spread out his payments over 2 or 3 years. Any garage would agree to that arrangement. 3 weeks later, Andrew drove home in an expensive new car. He ran into the house and called out, "Christine! Christine! Come and see something!" He had meant to surprise her, and he succeeded. "Andrew, is this ours? Oh, what a beauty!" He smiled at her. "Step inside, lady, and I'll take you for a drive." She admired the car again and again as he drove her through the streets. They went out together so rarely now that she made the most of every minute. She said happily, "Now perhaps we can drive into the country on Sundays. Oh, that would be so nice." The suggestion annoyed Andrew. "Oh, all right, I suppose so," he answered. "But we can't make a habit of driving into the country. The car is for work, not for pleasure." They drove home in silence. On Thursday, as he was leaving the Leroy's house, Andrew met Freddie Hampson. "Hello, Hampson," he said. Freddie looked at him in surprise. "Why, hello! What are you doing here?" "Patient," Andrew answered, pointing towards the house. "I'm attending Leroy's daughter." "Leroy?" Delighted at Freddie's surprise, Andrew proudly put his hand on the door of his new car and asked, "Which way are you going? Can I drive you anywhere?" "I'm going to Ida Sherrington's nursing home," said Freddie. "You can drive me there if you like." As they drove to the nursing home, both men were silent. Hampson was thinking. He had given Andrew a warm welcome when he came to London, because he had hoped that Manson might occasionally ask for his opinion about a case, for which he would be able to charge the patient £3. But now this surprising change in his old friend, his new clothes, the car, and his mention of Leroy, gave Hampson reason to believe that Andrew might be more helpful to him than he had expected. "Come in and meet Ida," he suggested when they reached the nursing home. "Her home is one of the worst in London, but she makes a lot of money. She's a person worth knowing." "Yes?" "Come in with me and see my patient, old Mrs. Rayburn. Ivor and I are doing a few tests on her. Come and examine her chest. That would please her, and she'd pay you £5. "What? You mean... But what's the matter with her chest?" "Nothing," Freddie smiled. "Don't look so surprised. That's how we work here, Ivory Deedman and I. You really ought to join up with us. The success of our system would surprise you." Andrew got out of the car and looked at the tall, cold building. He then turned his head and listened to the noise of the cars and the buses in the street. He asked himself how any sick person could find peace here. Andrew mentioned this to Hampson as they entered the building. "Yes, it is noisy," Freddie agreed. "But the area is very convenient for us. That's all that matters." He led Andrew into a small office, where a fat woman with a red face sat at a desk. "Good morning, Ida," Freddie called out. "I brought Dr. Manson to see you." Ida greeted Manson in a friendly manner. After they had talked together for a few minutes, Freddie interrupted them. "Take a good look at him," he said to Ida. "He'll soon be sending you a lot of patients." Hampson laughed, and then led Andrew upstairs to see Mrs. Rayburn. She was a woman of about 60. Freddie sat on her bed and talked to her. He told her that Mr. Ivory would call next day to tell her about the result of his important tests, and he asked her to allow Dr. Manson, who had made a special study of lungs, to examine her chest. Mrs. Rayburn was delighted at the suggestion. She enjoyed the examination. She was a rich woman and liked to spend her money on her health. "Heavens!" Freddie said as they left the room. "You've no idea how much money we have made from that old woman." Andrew did not answer. This place gave him a feeling of disgust. There was nothing wrong with the old lady, and Freddie's behaviour was shameful. He shook hands with Hampson and drove away. At the end of the month, when he received a cheque for £5 from Mrs. Rayburn, he decided that he had been foolish to feel as he did. He had given her his services and had earned this payment. He accepted the cheque.